Welcome to African Folktales by Tammy. Please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more interesting stories. Also share this story to someone who might be interested. Let's get into the story. The sun rose over Elmsworth like a sleepy monarch, casting a soft orange hue over the city's waking face. Tucked in one of its quieter districts, away from the noise of wealth and ambition, Isabel Monroe stood at the window of her modest home, nursing a cup of tea that had long gone cold. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, gentle eyes, dark smooth skin kissed by sunlight, lips slightly parted in thought. Though the world knew her husband, Darren Monroe, as the mysterious billionaire behind La Vida Lux, very few knew her name and even fewer had seen her face. Not because she lacked importance, but because she chose it that way. Like a diamond hidden in velvet, she preferred to shine in quiet places. Isabel had never cared for attention or the claws that came with it. People were quick to admire the crown, but rarely understood the weight of it. She had seen how titles twisted faces, how power lured fake smiles and hungry eyes. Years ago, she had watched friendship sour when wealth whispered her name, watched neighbors who once borrowed salt now speak in hushed envy. It broke her in places applause could never reach. So she chose the shadows, not out of shame but protection. Darren, in his quiet understanding, never questioned her choice. He knew her silence was not weakness, it was wisdom wrapped in peace. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty, Psalm 91 verse 1. And so she dwelt. The decision to step forward didn't come overnight. It was like water carving stone, slow, patient, inevitable. Isabel had spent years behind the scenes, supporting Darren, advising him, and building women in her community through grassroots training. Her hands had created, her voice had taught, but her name had remained unknown. Still, there was a stirring now, like wind ruffling leaves before the rain. She felt it deep in her chest, the need to no longer just whisper behind greatness, but to wear her own name boldly in the world she had helped shape. La Vida Lux had always been Darren's empire, but she knew it like her own heartbeat. She had given insights, ideas, and even birthed the concept behind its whim-led fashion line. Now she wanted to earn her place not as Madame Monroe, but as Isabel. So she told Darren one rainy Sunday evening as they shared boiled plantain and fish stew on the back porch. Her voice was steady, her eyes unwavering. "I want to join La Vida," she said. Darren raised an eyebrow, placing his spoon down. "As my wife?" he asked. She smiled. "No, as myself," he didn't hesitate. "Then apply like everyone else." The words settled between them like a pact. It was not favoritism she sought, it was purpose, and she would earn it the hard way, like the woman she had grown to be. After all, gold is not afraid of fire. The morning she submitted her application, the air carried the scent of jacaranda and resolve. Isabel wore a simple navy blue gown and tied her natural hair into a low bun. She didn't need glam or glitter. Her confidence was her ornament. As she walked into the glass building of La Vida Lux, her heart pounded like the drumbeat of destiny. She had stood here many times before as Darren's wife, usually sneaking in through private elevators. But today she entered through the front doors, where everyone else passed, where names were unknown, and status didn't speak first. The receptionist greeted her with a half-smile, clearly distracted. Isabel responded warmly and took a seat, waiting like any other hopeful. She saw women rehearsing their elevator pitches, men fixing their ties nervously, and somewhere amid the crowd she felt perfectly at home. This was the soil where growth happened in humility, not privilege. And though her palms were moist, her spirit was calm. Isaiah 41 verse 10 whispered in her memory, "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God." She clutched her brown leather file, praying silently for nothing but the chance to be seen for who she was, not whose name she carried. Upstairs, however, a different tale brewed. Miranda Quinn, the company's newly appointed head of recruitment, stood before the mirror in her office, adjusting her scarlet blouse. Her dark eyes sparkled, her caramel-toned makeup flawless, her lips curled into a smirk of superiority. She had clawed her way to this position, not by merit, but by seduction. Her affair with Darren had begun a year ago when charm met opportunity. Darren, unaware of the storm beneath her beauty, had offered her a role after she claimed to be struggling professionally. She seized it, worming her way up with sharp elbows and sugar-coated lies. Now, she believed she was untouchable. Many whispered behind her back, but no one dared confront her. She was bold, brash, and believed she would one day become Mrs. Monroe. So, when a receptionist buzzed to say a plain woman in a blue gown had arrived without an appointment, Miranda scoffed. "These jobless nobodies," she hissed. "Send her in, let me enjoy some entertainment." She stood, heels clicking, unaware that the woman she was about to belittle was the true queen she thought she had dethroned. Pride had clouded her judgment. But as Proverbs 16 verse 18 says, "Pride goeth before destruction, and an haughty spirit before a fall." And Miranda was about to fall hard into a silence she would never forget. The door creaked open as Isabel stepped gently into the glass-walled interview room, her eyes taking in the luxurious decor she had once seen only from behind Darren's office or the tinted windows of his car. The walls glistened with gold-framed photographs, and the air smelled of imported perfume and polished pride. She held her brown file to her chest like a shield, her expression calm, her spirit cloaked in modesty. Across the room sat Miranda, lounging behind a large mahogany desk like a cat who believed she owned the creamery. Her stiletto heels were propped on the edge of the table, red like the warning light on a dashboard. Without looking up, she muttered, "You have exactly 5 minutes. I don't have time for strays today." Isabel stood still, not out of fear but restraint. The room suddenly felt colder, not from air conditioning, but the chill of arrogance that had long overstayed its welcome. Miranda finally raised her gaze, her expression laced with practiced disdain. Her eyes scanned Isabel's attire, simple navy gown, soft leather shoes, no jewelry. A short, amused laugh escaped her lips. "You're clearly in the wrong place, Auntie," she said, drawing the last word like a blade. "We're not taking cleaners today." The words stung the air like pepper in the eyes, but Isabel remained composed. Proverbs 15 verse 1 came to her heart, "A soft answer turneth away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger." So she smiled gently and replied, "I believe I have an appointment." But Miranda had no interest in facts, only in feeding her ego. Miranda stood, adjusting her blouse dramatically as though she were a judge about to sentence someone to life in mediocrity. "Look, I'm being very generous even allowing you inside. I don't know how you got past the reception. Maybe you dropped some pity story about needing a job, or maybe someone out there thought you were here to serve tea. But this," she waved her hand dismissively over Isabel's entire being, "this is not the place for you." She circled around Isabel like a hawk examining weak prey. "Your dress looks like it's from a second-hand stall in Central Elmsworth. No makeup, no brand, not even a LinkedIn profile, I bet." Isabel stood still, watching her, not blinking. Miranda stepped closer, her voice lowering to a venomous whisper. "We are not running a charity here. La Vida Lux is for polished, presentable elite women. You're a mistake." When Isabel calmly began to open her file to present her resume, Miranda's hand flew up and smacked the file shut. The slap echoed, not against flesh but against dignity. Miranda then took a step back and, with a face twisted in disgust, reached for Isabel's shoulder and shoved her backward toward the door. "Get out before you embarrass yourself any further," she hissed. "Go beg for scraps somewhere else." And with that, the door opened behind Isabel by the confused receptionist who had watched the scene unfold through the translucent glass. Isabel, though burning with silent tears inside, walked out without a word. Her silence was her shield, her restraint was her sword. She had been underestimated, but even a lion walks quietly before it roars. Downstairs, the receptionist, a young man named Felix with a sharp mind and wide eyes, watched Isabel exit with a look of troubled admiration. He had heard stories about corporate wickedness, but witnessing it firsthand unsettled him. He had been working there just 6 months, and already he had seen Miranda reduce interns to tears and dismiss bright-eyed applicants simply because they didn't fit her polished mold. But this felt different. There was something about the woman that Miranda just humiliated that didn't scream desperation. She hadn't begged, she hadn't shouted, she hadn't even looked broken. Her silence wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the silence of someone who knew storms didn't shake mountains. The rejected stone, Felix muttered under his breath, might just be the cornerstone, Psalm 118 verse 22. Upstairs, Miranda was laughing with one of her colleagues over what she called the morning entertainment. She looked like a mother of 5 who lost her way to a welfare center, Miranda mocked, sipping her coffee as if it were laced with victory. Little did she know that the same woman she had dismissed so cruelly was closer to the top floor than she could ever imagine. Felix returned to his desk and silently scribbled down the incident in his notebook. He had a habit of recording injustices he witnessed. One day, he always told himself, truth walks into the room wearing quiet shoes, and Isabel had walked in with hers polished. That evening, back at home, Isabel sat at the edge of their bed, her navy gown slightly wrinkled from the day's events, her file unopened on the dresser. She hadn't told Darren yet, not because she feared his reaction, but because she didn't want pity to overshadow purpose. She replayed the humiliation in her mind, not with bitterness, but with quiet reflection. Sometimes God allowed you to be buried, not to end you, but to plant you. We are troubled on every side, yet not distressed. We are perplexed, but not in despair, 2 Corinthians 4 verse 8. Just then Darren entered the room, removing his tie, looking at her with that knowing calm. "You didn't call me all day," he said. She gave a small smile, then slowly told him everything. Not a tear dropped from her eye, not a quiver shook her voice. Darren's eyes darkened, not with rage, but with cold disbelief. He sat beside her and gently took her hand. "She slapped you?" he asked. She nodded once. "Pushed you?" She nodded again. He exhaled a slow, deliberate breath. "And you didn't tell her who you were?" Isabel looked him dead in the eye. "Why would I?" she whispered. "I needed her to see me before she saw the name." Darren stood slowly, pacing to the window. His hands trembled slightly and his jaw tensed. "She thought she humiliated you," he said, "but what she did was write her own exit letter. And she signed it with pride." Outside, the night cloaked the city, unaware that a storm was gathering, not loud but deliberate. And it bore Isabel's name. The following morning, a strange stillness settled over La Vida Lux headquarters, as though the walls had sensed something brewing, something that couldn't be explained with memos or morning schedules. Darren Monroe's personal driver parked quietly at the basement entrance as always, but today he didn't head to his private elevator immediately. Instead, Darren took a slow walk through the lower corridors of the building, observing the people who usually never got close enough to see him. His face, with its deep-set brown eyes, neatly trimmed beard and calm air, was unreadable. Clad in a sharp black tailored suit with silver cufflinks and polished leather shoes, he looked like power wrapped in silence. Yet behind that composure, a quiet rage pulsed steadily. Darren had built La Vida Lux with his bare hands and Isabel's insight. Her voice echoed in every corner of the company, from product lines to the brand's core values. He had trusted many people along the way, but Miranda's betrayal touched a nerve he didn't even know was exposed. She wasn't just rude to an applicant, she had dared to humiliate the very heart of his life. Darren didn't believe in loud confrontations or public drama, but what Miranda didn't know was that her judgment day had already clocked in. Ecclesiastes 12 verse 14 whispered in his chest, "For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil." He tapped his phone, made a few quiet calls to HR and legal, and by the time he got into his office, the pieces were already moving on the board, unseen but unstoppable. Upstairs, Miranda twirled in her chair like a queen waiting for her crown to arrive. She was dressed in an emerald green suit dress that hugged her curves precisely. Her dark brown lace wig curled into perfect waves, nails painted a glossy wine color. Every inch of her screamed self-importance. To her, the air in the office smelled sweeter since she had gotten rid of that charity case from yesterday. She had even recounted the story over drinks with a few staff the previous night, turning it into an exaggerated comedy skit for laughs. Her ego had feasted well on the humiliation she dished out. What Miranda didn't realize, however, was that beneath her rising tide of pride, a crack had begun to spread across her ship's hull. She'd climbed her way up using charm and proximity to the CEO, never expecting consequences to tap on her shoulder one morning with a clipboard. She believed she had Darren wrapped around her finger, convinced that their late-night flirtations and his silent tolerance of her arrogance were signs of emotional favor. In her fantasy, she wasn't just climbing the corporate ladder, she was on the express elevator to becoming Mrs. Monroe. Little did she know that Darren's silence wasn't affection. It was observation, and he had seen more than she thought. The fool, they say, thinks the silence of the wise is consent, but the wise are often just waiting for the perfect time to respond. Proverbs 26 verse 27 would soon manifest in her life. Whoever digs a pit will fall into it. If someone rolls a stone, it will roll back on them. By noon, Darren summoned the HR director, Mr. Wallace, and the legal compliance officer, Ms. Chantal, into his office. He stood by the window, arms folded, watching the city breathe below. "I need both of you to initiate a full review of the recruitment unit," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "Effective immediately." Wallace, a tall elderly gentleman with grey sideburns and a seasoned eye, nodded slowly. "Are we investigating Miranda?" Darren turned, eyes sharp. "We are confirming if what I've heard is a one-time display of arrogance or a consistent abuse of office." Chantal, a no-nonsense woman known for her surgical precision with policy enforcement, flipped open her notepad. "Should I begin with internal complaints and external applicant reports?" Darren nodded once. "Start with yesterday's walk-in applicant. I want everything documented, names, witnesses, timestamps. No detail is too small." He paused, the silence heavy. "And when you're done, bring Miranda to the executive boardroom. I'll be addressing this myself." Chantal raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. She knew Darren was rarely ever this hands-on. If he was involving himself, something serious had occurred. As they left, Darren sat at his desk, opened his private drawer, and pulled out the file Isabel had left behind. Her resume sat at the top with no name flaunted, just skill, service, and sacrifice. His heart tightened. His wife had walked into his empire like a stranger and been treated like dirt. But she had walked out like royalty without needing a crown. And now it was time to make the truth known, not just to Miranda, but to everyone watching from the shadows. The boardroom was colder than usual when Miranda was escorted in. She walked in with the confidence of a cat, hips swaying, eyes slightly narrowed in curiosity. Darren sat at the far end of the long oak table, expression unreadable. Mr. Wallace and Miss Chantal sat to his right, and two other silent senior executives flanked the left. The atmosphere was thick with tension, the kind that made even air seem heavy. Miranda's smile faltered for the first time. "Is something wrong?" she asked, her voice laced with nervous charm. Darren didn't speak. Instead, Chantal pushed forward a printed report, reading aloud every detail of yesterday's event, how Miranda had insulted, slapped, and shoved an applicant. Witness accounts were cited, surveillance timestamps confirmed, and the receptionist's testimony added to the pile. Miranda's eyes widened slowly as the dots connected. I didn't know who she was," she stammered. Darren's voice sliced through the room like a guillotine. "That's the problem, Miranda. You treated someone's worth based on what you thought you saw. You judged the soil without understanding the seed." He stood slowly, buttoning his suit jacket. "The woman you humiliated was my wife." Miranda staggered back, lips parting but no sound emerging. Your wife," she whispered. Darren nodded. "And now, Miranda, you're going to learn what it means to fall from a ladder you never truly climbed." She reached out in desperation, but Darren simply stepped back. "Pack your things. HR will escort you out after we're done." And with that, he turned away, leaving her frozen, her world spinning, the echo of her downfall beginning to roar in her ears. The same hands that had pushed the queen had now signed their own exit. Justice hadn't needed noise, it had walked in wearing quiet heels. The air in the boardroom had thickened with the kind of silence that could smother pride. Miranda stood there, her mouth agape, the blood draining from her face as Darren's words echoed in her ears like the final toll of a cathedral bell. Her emerald green suit, once a symbol of confidence, now hung awkwardly on her body like armor stripped of its shine. She attempted a small laugh, a desperate act to water down the reality that had just planted itself firmly at her feet. "Sir, I didn't know," she stuttered, her voice now 2 octaves lower, trembling not from cold but from exposure. But Darren remained unmoved, his expression as resolute as a carved monument. He wasn't just addressing an employee who had crossed the line, he was confronting the kind of behavior he had vowed never to tolerate in his empire. Humiliation disguised as protocol, cruelty masked as professionalism. Ignorance, he said softly, isn't a shield when you've chosen arrogance as your sword. Every executive in that room sat frozen, not just from shock, but from the reckoning unfolding before them. Some had laughed with Miranda behind closed doors. Some had turned blind eyes, but today all eyes were forced open and none could look away. The woman they mocked had been the heart behind the curtain. The one Miranda called a charity case was the unseen architect of the very culture they praised. Outside the boardroom, the corridors of La Vida Lux buzzed with rumors spreading like wildfire. Felix, the receptionist, tried to focus on his work, but the whispers around him were loud enough to carry stories to the heavens. Interns huddled by water dispensers, their eyes wide with the kind of curiosity that only corporate chaos could birth. "Did you hear?" one whispered. "That woman from yesterday, she's the CEO's wife." The revelation sliced through every assumption, shattering the facade Miranda had built like a house of cards caught in a windstorm. Staff who once feared her now spoke her name with hushed disdain. "No wonder she was always so full of herself," another muttered. The irony dripped like oil from fried stew. The same people who had once praised Miranda's authority were now eager to distance themselves from her sinking ship. It was a brutal reminder that admiration built on fear evaporates once the mask slips. Meanwhile, Darren and Isabel's names became sacred. People began recalling the times a suggestion made quietly by Darren was executed with grace, not noise. The staff remembered seeing Isabel's gentle smile at charity events sponsored by the company, never realizing she had fingerprints on the brand's success. The stone the builders had rejected had not only become the cornerstone, it had revealed the cracks in their foundation. Isaiah 2 verse 11 played out vividly. "The proud look of man shall be humbled, and the lofty pride of men shall be brought low." In a quiet corner office several floors below, Isabel sat before her new desk, not as a queen come to reclaim a throne, but as a servant leader ready to sow deeper roots. After much discussion with Darren, she had chosen not to accept the leadership role she originally applied for. Instead, she humbly requested a position in the corporate social responsibility department, working with underprivileged women across Elmsworth and beyond. "I don't need a title to lead," she had told Darren. "I just need purpose and people." Her office was modest, no leather chairs, no gold-embossed plaques, just a wooden desk, a vision board, and a window that overlooked the garden she had once helped design during the company's first anniversary celebration. She poured herself a glass of water, her fingers steady, her heart filled with gratitude, not revenge. Isabel knew her rise wasn't about Miranda's fall. Her victory wasn't measured in someone else's loss, but in her own journey from invisibility to impact. She sat down, opened a blank notebook, and began writing down ideas for a new mentorship program. Proverbs 31 verse 25 whispered through her thoughts. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she laughs without fear of the future. It wasn't about being seen now. It was about making others feel seen. While the world was busy gossiping upstairs, Isabel was quietly building something deeper. The throne she now carried couldn't be touched by office politics or egos. It lived inside her, stitched into every word she spoke, every life she touched. Miranda was escorted out of the building that same day, not through the back, but the front entrance she once floated through with her nose in the clouds. She wore dark glasses and a scarf tied around her wig, but no disguise could hide a fall so loud. As she stepped into the parking lot, reporters swarmed like bees drawn to scandal. "Miranda Quinn, were you aware the woman you assaulted was the CEO's wife?" one shouted. "Do you have anything to say about the claims of abuse of power?" another asked. But Miranda kept walking, head lowered, clutching her handbag as if it held the last shred of her dignity. Her car, a sleek red coupe she once used to intimidate junior staff, now felt like a cage. She drove off without answering, the engine roaring against the silence of humiliation. Back in her apartment, she collapsed onto her couch, her eyes wild, her breath short. She replayed Darren's words over and over, her mind clawing for justification, for a loophole, for anything that would make it not true. But truth, like a lion, didn't need defending. It had roared, and it had devoured her pride. She opened her laptop and logged into social media, only to find that news of her disgrace was already trending. Former colleagues were unfollowing. Influencers she once bragged about knowing had deleted pictures with her. She had thought her proximity to power made her untouchable, but all it had done was mask her hollowness. Pride had built her castle in the clouds, but now it was raining, and she had no roof. The woman she called nothing had left her with nothing, no role, no reputation, and no one. 3 weeks passed like a whisper in the wind, but the echoes of what happened at La Vida Lux still roamed the halls like an invisible supervisor. Staff who once chased clout had begun to chase character. Meetings no longer started with pretentious laughter, but with thoughtful silence and eager ears. Darren Monroe, though still the enigmatic figurehead of the empire, became more visibly engaged, not with loud declarations, but with small gestures that made the biggest waves. He greeted janitors by name, he stopped to listen to interns, and he publicly praised departments that had previously gone unnoticed. And amid all of this, Isabel quietly grew into her new role like a tree that had always known how to reach for the sun. Her mentorship program, titled Hidden Queens, had launched within 10 working days of her first brainstorm. The vision was clear: train and empower women from low-income backgrounds to step into corporate spaces with both skill and grace. It wasn't a publicity stunt, it wasn't even announced with drums. It simply began one life at a time, one story after another. Women who had once scrubbed office floors now sat in front of computers they were learning to master. Girls who had dropped out of school were now designing sustainable fashion pieces under Isabel's guidance. And through it all, Isabel wore humility like perfume, gentle, pleasant, undeniable. Colossians 3 verse 12 echoed through her actions. Clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. The empire that had once overlooked her was now being reshaped by her hands, not as a queen shouting from a throne, but as a builder laying bricks with love. The change in atmosphere didn't go unnoticed. Investors began commenting on the shift, not just in productivity, but in morale. The company's culture had transformed. One of the senior board members, Ms. Leonard, a woman who had always valued appearances over impact, pulled Darren aside after a quarterly review meeting. "Whatever your wife is doing," she said softly, "it's changing everything." Darren nodded without arrogance. "She's doing what many forget to, she's listening." Meanwhile, Isabel continued working quietly from her office, never demanding acknowledgement, never craving applause. She was often the last to leave, staying behind to answer one more email or update a new intake form for the mentorship group. Felix, the receptionist who once watched her walk out in tears, now volunteered during lunch breaks to help with logistics for her training programs. One afternoon, he stood at her door and said, "Ma, I think you've turned this place into something it was always meant to be." Isabel smiled warmly. "No, Felix. I think I'm just reminding it who it is." Word spread to community centers across Elmsworth. Women who had long believed they were too ordinary to dream started showing up in droves, sewing kits in hand, CVs tucked under arms, hope resurrected like Lazarus in a tomb. Isaiah 61 verse 3 became the heartbeat of the program, to give them beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. And indeed, the office began to shine, not with chandeliers or decor, but with redemption. While La Vida Lux basked in newfound light, Miranda sank deeper into her personal abyss. Her apartment, once decorated with symbols of ambition, designer heels lined up like trophies, expensive perfumes displayed like rare gems, now felt like a mausoleum of lost pride. She has stopped updating her social media, afraid of the questions, the mockery, the silence that greeted every new post. One afternoon, she stepped out wearing oversized sunglasses and a hoodie, hoping to avoid recognition, only to overhear two women at the corner bakery whisper, "That's her, the one who pushed the CEO's wife." The words clung to her like smoke. She hurried away, the weight of shame crushing her shoulders. Pride had once dressed her in silk, now it clothed her in isolation. She applied for jobs in smaller firms, but her name triggered red flags. Some responses were polite rejections. Others didn't even bother with courtesy. Her network had dried up. Her phone had become a museum of unanswered calls. She had once believed proximity to power made her invincible. But what she failed to understand was that power, when misused, doesn't protect, it punishes. Galatians 6 verse 7 returned to haunt her. Be not deceived, God is not mocked, for whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. And Miranda had sown cruelty, watered it with pride, and now harvested solitude. Her reflection in the mirror no longer smirked. It stared back at her hollow, asking the question she feared most. Who are you without the titles? Despite all this, Isabel never once gloated. Her life didn't revolve around Miranda's downfall. It revolved around lifting others. One Friday evening, La Vida Lux hosted a private in-house gala for its 10-year anniversary, an event planned months prior but now carrying unexpected significance. The theme, Royalty in Silence. Staff were encouraged to come dressed as their interpretation of quiet strength. The night glowed with candlelight, soft jazz floated through the air, and the walls were lined with portraits of unsung heroes within the company: drivers, janitors, assistants, receptionists. And in the center of it all stood Isabel, radiant in a navy blue off-shoulder gown, her natural curls pinned into an elegant updo, her aura calm but undeniable. She stood beside Darren, whose tailored tuxedo complemented her dress like night completes the moon. When he took the microphone, the room fell silent, not because of his title, but because of what was coming. Tonight, Darren said, his voice steady, we celebrate not just 10 years of growth, but the rebirth of our values. He paused, his gaze locking with Isabel's. And to the woman who reminded us all that greatness doesn't shout, it acts, I thank you. The room erupted in applause, not for show, but from sincerity. And amid the cheers, a few teary eyes, and heartfelt toasts, Isabel simply smiled. She didn't need to take the stage. Her impact had already spoken. And for the first time in a long time, Elmsworth learned that sometimes a crown sits on the head of the woman who speaks the least, but builds the most. Morning dawned with the sound of light rain tapping gently against the wide glass windows of La Vida Lux's headquarters, a soft percussion that mirrored the rhythm of hearts beating across the company, some with anticipation, others with reverence. The atmosphere in the building had evolved into something sacred, almost spiritual, as if humility itself now had an office on the top floor. From the janitor mopping the marble hallway to the top-tier executives fine-tuning quarterly targets, everyone walked with a new awareness, an understanding that titles could be stripped, but character would always testify. In the heart of this transformation stood Isabel, whose steps through the corridors had become more than routine. Her presence didn't demand space, it created it. People made way not out of fear, but out of deep respect. When she smiled, it felt like sunlight breaking through thick fog. When she spoke, her words sank deep like seeds dropped into fertile ground. Yet she remained unchanged. She didn't start wearing designer badges or requesting personal assistance. She still brewed her own tea in the break room. She still greeted the security guards by name. Her consistency was the loudest sermon, one that reminded everyone that legacy is not built in moments of glory, but in the ordinary minutes between. Psalm 37, verse 6 whispered around her like a promise fulfilled. And he shall bring forth thy righteousness as the light, and thy judgment as the noonday. The story of her humiliation and silent triumph had traveled beyond office walls. It had seeped into salons and church gatherings, corner cafes and boardroom gossip, but no one told it with spite or exaggeration. The story had morphed into something symbolic, a tale of patience meeting power, of dignity outlasting disgrace. Women in Elmsworth had begun whispering her name with hope rather than curiosity. Mothers pointed her out as an example to their daughters. Influential blogs and quiet forums alike now use the phrase "pulled a Monroe" to describe overcoming insults with grace. But Isabel remained oblivious to the rising myth around her. She didn't see herself as a hero. She was simply a woman who chose not to trade her peace for pride. On the day of the final mentorship workshop, as she stood before 50 young women who had once walked in broken but now stood tall with heads raised, her eyes filled with quiet emotion. She saw in them the version of herself she once hid, the woman afraid of being misunderstood, underestimated, unseen. She walked to the front of the room without a script, stood for a moment in silence, then said, "You don't have to be loud to be powerful. Just be clear about who you are." The room was still except for sniffles and soft nods. Then she smiled and added, "Don't ever let someone else's blindness make you question your light." That single sentence found its way online the next day and circled the globe in hours. She didn't even know who posted it, but she didn't need credit. Her work was the testimony, and Ecclesiastes 9 verse 11 came alive before their eyes. The race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, but time and chance happeneth to them all. Somewhere across town, Miranda sat on a worn-out armchair in her aunt's small flat, staring blankly at the television, where the local news was covering La Vida Lux's mentorship graduation gala. Her aunt had gone to the kitchen to boil yam, leaving her alone with images that stung deeper than slaps. She watched as cameras panned to Isabel, smiling gently, her natural curls bouncing as she hugged graduates one by one. The same woman she had once shoved toward an exit door was now being celebrated without a crown, yet recognized as a queen. Miranda swallowed hard, her throat tight, her eyes dry from too many nights of crying. There had been moments she tried to justify her actions, moments she told herself that she was only doing her job, that she had simply been honest, that she hadn't known. But deep down, she knew none of that mattered. What mattered was how she had treated another human being. Her downfall wasn't just about what she did to the CEO's wife. It was about who she had become long before that moment. Her arrogance had blinded her to decency, and now, stripped of everything, she saw herself clearly for the first time in years. She no longer craved revenge or wished for a second chance at La Vida Lux. What she desired now was redemption, not from society but from herself. She looked around the cramped apartment, then slowly stood and walked to the mirror. She stared at her reflection and whispered, "You can't undo the past, but you can choose the woman you become next." For the first time, her voice didn't carry defensiveness. It carried resolve. On a cool Saturday afternoon, weeks after the gala, Isabel and Darren sat beneath a flowering almond tree in their garden, their fingers intertwined, the scent of hibiscus blooming around them. They hadn't spoken much in the last hour, choosing instead to enjoy the quiet, a kind of silence that didn't demand filling. Darren, dressed in a loose linen shirt and trousers, leaned back and looked at his wife with a softness few had ever seen. "Do you regret staying silent that day?" he asked, referring to the moment Miranda pushed her. Isabel smiled, her eyes fixed on a bird fluttering near a nearby feeder. "No," she said gently. "If I had reacted, I would have lost more than my temper. I would have lost my clarity." Darren nodded, squeezing her hand. "You changed the entire company, Izzy." She chuckled. "No, I just reminded them of what it should have always been." In the distance, laughter from neighborhood children floated over the garden wall. Isabel leaned her head on Darren's shoulder, her heart full not of pride but of peace. She had walked through the fire without shouting, and the flames had only refined her. In the stillness, Darren picked a petal from the tree and held it up. "You know," he said with a grin, "I always thought queens wore crowns." Isabel looked up at him, her expression calm, her eyes glowing. "Some do," she replied, "but the real ones, they wear silence, and they never take it off." Isaiah 32 verse 17 echoed softly in that moment, "And the work of righteousness shall be peace, and the effect of righteousness quietness and assurance forever." And with that, the story didn't end, it simply became a legacy. My dear listeners, this story wasn't just about revenge or reputation. It was about the quiet, powerful grace of a woman who knew who she was and never needed to shout it to the world. Many of you may have faced humiliation, rejection, or judgment from people who looked at your appearance and decided you were less than. Some of you have been pushed out of rooms you were destined to lead. But hear me clearly, your worth is not defined by their ignorance. There is strength in silence, dignity in restraint, and power in letting your actions speak. Sometimes the loudest victory is the one that doesn't make noise. When they slap your name with lies, let your truth shine quietly. When they underestimate you, let your growth surprise them. You don't need to announce every move. Just stay planted, stay rooted, and when it's time, you'll bloom in places they never thought to look. Remember, those who mocked you will one day witness your becoming. And just like Isabel, you don't have to raise your voice to rise. God sees you. Heaven records every injustice, every tear you didn't cry aloud, every grace-filled moment you chose peace over retaliation. Hold on to who you are. You are more than enough, even if the world hasn't caught up to that truth yet. Now let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the gift of quiet strength. We thank you for every listener who has endured pain in silence, who has been pushed aside, talked down to, or overlooked. Lord, today we pray for everyone carrying silent battles. Replace their shame with honor, their sorrow with purpose. Father, like you lifted Joseph from prison to palace, lift them from rejection to relevance. Give them the grace to remain calm when insulted, and the wisdom to know when to speak and when to be still. May their silence never be mistaken for weakness. Let their lives speak louder than their enemies. O God, set a table before them in the presence of those who doubted them. Let their light shine in a way that even the darkest hearts cannot deny. For every listener who has been hurt by someone in authority, someone close or someone jealous, Lord, we ask for healing. For those waiting for their moment to rise, may it come swiftly and beautifully. May they rise without bitterness, and may their stories inspire nations. We declare over every listener, you will not beg for recognition. You will not fight to be seen. God will announce you in rooms where your name was once dragged. Your life will be proof that grace wins. If you believe this prayer, if you feel it in your spirit, drop an amen in the comments and claim your season of silent victory. You won't need to shout. Your results will do the talking. We've come to the end of this story. Please subscribe to my channel to support me. Thank you.